Ladies and gentlemen, let me begin by revealing to you one of the most powerful, yet most dangerous forces ever placed in the human soul, the need to be seen, valued, and respected. When this need is denied, especially by someone trusted, someone once cherished, the very foundation of reason and emotion begins to quake. In every man's journey through relationships, there comes a point when he chooses to withhold attention, affection, or validation, believing it grants him power. But let me declare to you today, when you act as if she doesn't matter, you may gain control temporarily, but you spark within her a fire no man can contain, a storm born not of weakness, but of emotional injustice. You are not merely dealing with a woman's silence, you are igniting her awakening. You are not just bruising her heart, you are forcing her to confront her worth. And once she recognizes the truth that she mattered all along without your recognition, she no longer seeks your validation. And that, my friends, is the moment everything changes. This is not just a speech, it is a revelation, a warning, and a wake-up call. Emotional neglect triggers a psychological breaking point because the human spirit can only endure so much invisibility before it begins to fracture. When someone constantly feels overlooked, dismissed, or undervalued, especially by someone they love or trust, it doesn't just hurt, it rewires their entire perception of self. This is not a shallow reaction. It's a deep psychological consequence rooted in a fundamental human need to be seen and acknowledged. Emotional neglect is a subtle destroyer. It doesn't shout. It whispers in moments of silence, in glances avoided, in conversations cut short, and in affection withheld. Over time, those whispers grow louder inside the mind of the neglected person. They begin to ask, am I not good enough? Why don't I matter? What have I done wrong? And these questions echo endlessly until something inside them begins to snap. The neglected individual starts to internalize the lack of attention as evidence of unworthiness. They overanalyze every interaction. They tiptoe around emotions. They put in more effort hoping it will earn them what should be freely given: respect, love, and consideration. But when those efforts go unnoticed or are taken for granted, the emotional scales begin to tip. A breaking point looms on the horizon. That breaking point isn't just a moment of anger or sadness. It's a moment of realization. It's when the person who once gave everything emotionally begins to retreat into herself, not out of hate, but out of self-preservation. The emotional neglect, which may have once been bearable, becomes intolerable. The psychological weight becomes too heavy to carry. This breaking point is powerful because it forces change. The person can no longer pretend everything is fine. They can't keep justifying someone else's emotional absence. Their mind, once clouded by hope and patience, begins to clear, and the truth becomes undeniable. They see that their emotional needs have been unmet for far too long. And in that moment, a storm brews, not just of frustration toward the one who neglected them, but of internal reckoning. They can no longer sacrifice their mental and emotional well-being in exchange for someone else's comfort. They are forced to confront not just the behavior of the other person, but their own silence in enduring it for so long. Dismissal breeds inner chaos and silent rebellion because the act of being constantly ignored, minimized, or emotionally pushed aside causes a war within the soul. It's a unique kind of pain when someone you value treats your thoughts, your presence, or your emotions as irrelevant. Over time, this dismissal begins to feel like erasure. It chips away at your confidence, your dignity, and your sense of belonging. You begin to question not only the relationship, but your very identity within it. That internal questioning becomes relentless. You replay conversations, reinterpret silences, and rethink every reaction, trying to decode what went wrong and why your voice no longer matters. What makes dismissal so damaging is its subtlety. It doesn't come in loud insults or obvious betrayals. It comes in quiet disregard, in not listening when you speak, in brushing off your feelings as overreactions, in never asking how you're really doing. These small daily acts begin to accumulate and build a kind of emotional clutter inside your mind. It becomes hard to think clearly, hard to sleep peacefully, hard to express yourself without feeling like you're being dramatic or needy. And while the outside world might not see any signs of distress, inside there is chaos, a restless storm that keeps building. This is where the silent rebellion begins. You may not raise your voice. You may not confront the one who dismisses you right away, but inside, a decision is forming. A quiet withdrawal takes root. You start to detach piece by piece, not because you stopped caring, but because you are trying to survive emotionally. You pull back your energy, your vulnerability, your effort. You stop seeking validation from someone who no longer honors your truth. The rebellion isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming your emotional territory. That silent rebellion is deeply misunderstood by those who never took time to understand the damage they caused. They might call it coldness or distance. They might accuse you of changing, but what they fail to realize is that this rebellion is the result of being pushed away too many times. It's not born out of malice. It's born out of repeated dismissal. You didn't want to turn away. You were driven to it by the refusal of someone else to truly see you, hear you, and value your presence. Her silence is not weakness. It's a recalibration of self-worth. When a woman goes quiet after being dismissed, ignored, or emotionally bruised, it is often misunderstood as surrender, but in truth, her silence is sacred. It is the space she creates to hear her own voice again after it has been drowned out by someone else's indifference. She retreats not because she has nothing to say, but because she realizes that speaking to deaf ears is a betrayal of her own soul. In the stillness, she begins the work of healing, silently, inwardly, powerfully. Silence becomes her protection. It shields her from further rejection, from the humiliation of begging for emotional crumbs. It is in this silence that she begins to see things clearly, without the noise of excuses, manipulations, or half-hearted apologies. She is able to confront reality. And reality often hurts more than any argument, because it forces her to admit how long she's been undervalued. But this moment of pain is also a moment of power. It marks the beginning of a new understanding of her worth, one that no longer depends on how someone else treats her. While others may interpret her quietness as emotional collapse, she is, in fact, reassembling herself. She is examining her boundaries. She is taking inventory of her energy. She is realizing that giving endlessly to someone who doesn't reciprocate is not love. It is self-abandonment. And as this awareness sets in, her silence grows stronger. It becomes intentional. It is no longer just a reaction. It is a decision to preserve her dignity, to stop bleeding for someone who wouldn't offer her a bandage. In this phase of silence, she learns to sit with herself. She learns that peace is not found in someone else's approval, but within the stillness of her own spirit. Her silence is the sound of her standards rising. It is the quiet revolution where she begins to trust herself again, honor herself again, and believe that she deserves more than what she has been given. The more she embraces the quiet, the more clarity she gains. She sees who stood by her, who used her, and who never truly valued her essence, and in that clarity she prepares to rise, not with words, but with strength. The moment she feels invisible, she begins to awaken. There is a strange and sacred transformation that occurs when a woman realizes she's no longer being truly seen by the one she gave her heart to. It is not an instant explosion. It is a slow burn. At first, she questions herself. She wonders if she's doing something wrong, if she's become less lovable, if she somehow caused the distance. She tries harder. She becomes more accommodating, more forgiving, more silent. She sacrifices pieces of herself in an attempt to restore what once was. But when the neglect continues and her presence is taken for granted no matter how much she gives, something begins to stir deep inside her soul. That stirring is the first signal of her awakening. The moment she feels invisible to someone else, she starts becoming visible to herself. She starts paying attention to her own pain, to her unmet needs, to the inner voice she silenced for too long, and that voice, once faint, begins to grow louder. It tells her she is not meant to be overlooked. It reminds her of the light she carries, the love she's capable of, and the respect she deserves. She begins to see that no matter how much she pours out, it will never be enough for someone who refuses to recognize her value. Her awakening is not dramatic. It's quiet, it's patient. It unfolds behind closed doors, in long nights of reflection, in tearful prayers, in journaling the truth she never dared to speak aloud. She starts reclaiming the power she gave away, piece by piece, moment by moment. And with every realization, she detaches a little more from the illusion she tried so hard to protect. The illusion that love could thrive in the absence of appreciation. The illusion that staying silent would bring peace. Invisibility no longer becomes a source of pain, it becomes her mirror. It shows her where she lost herself and why it's time to return. She begins to look at herself through new eyes. She starts dressing for herself, thinking for herself, dreaming for herself. And that shift, that internal revolution, becomes undeniable. The woman who once needed to be seen by someone else now starts to see herself, and that sight is powerful beyond measure. When love turns into disregard, love starts to rise. At first, it's difficult to admit that something so beautiful has decayed into something so cold. She holds on, hoping the warmth will return, hoping the distance is temporary, hoping that the man who once cherished her will come back with the same fire in his eyes. But over time, the signs become too loud to ignore, the compliments stop, the effort disappears, conversations become shallow, rushed, or avoided entirely. She starts to feel like a burden, an obligation, not a partner. And that shift, when love is no longer expressed, when affection turns into obligation, triggers an awakening within her. She begins to grieve not only the relationship, but the parts of herself she abandoned to keep it alive. She starts to see how much of her energy was spent trying to prove her worth to someone who stopped appreciating it. That's when something begins to change. The love she once directed outward, the care she gave so freely, starts to turn inward. Self-love doesn't rise as an act of revenge. It rises out of necessity. It becomes the lifeline she was denied from someone else. It becomes her survival. She begins to reclaim her time, her voice, her attention. The things she once did to please someone else, she now does to nourish herself. She starts to say no, not out of defiance, but out of clarity. She stops chasing approval and begins honoring her own standard. This isn't a hardened version of her, it's a healed one. It's a woman who now knows that love without respect is not love at all. That presence without attention is a slow kind of abandonment. As disregard grows, it strips away the illusions and reveals the truth. She sees that what she thought was love was often convenience, control, or comfort. And once she sees it, she can't unsee it. That clarity drives her inward, where she finds a love that does not depend on someone else's moods, words, or attention. She becomes her own safe space, her own validation, her own peace. Self-love rises not as a replacement for what was lost, but as the foundation for what will never be compromised again. Losing her mind is often the first step to finding her power. It doesn't happen all at once. It begins with confusion, exhaustion, and emotional overload. She feels like she's losing grip on who she is, constantly questioning herself, replaying moments, and trying to make sense of the disconnect between what she gave and what she received. This unraveling isn't madness. It's the mind's desperate attempt to process betrayal, abandonment, or emotional starvation. It feels like chaos, but it's the necessary disintegration of illusions she held onto for too long. When someone she trusted treats her as disposable, the psychological impact is enormous. She may cry in silence, isolate herself, or appear numb on the outside, but inside there's a breakdown taking place, a tearing down of everything she thought was real. This breakdown, however painful, is sacred. It's where she begins to confront the truth that her loyalty was misplaced, that her love was taken for granted, and that her needs were never truly met. She starts questioning everything, not to torment herself, but to understand where she lost her footing. This is the stage where she feels broken, irrational, and emotionally raw. But within that breakdown lies the blueprint of her transformation. The chaos inside her is not weakness. It's the beginning of reconstruction. It's the storm before the calm. It's the demolition of lies before the rebuilding of identity. As she allows herself to feel it all, the rage, the grief, the confusion, she begins to gather fragments of strength. Little by little, she stops seeking clarity from the one who hurt her and starts creating clarity within herself. Her emotions, once overwhelming, begin to make sense. Her thoughts, once spiraling, start to form patterns of wisdom. She recognizes what she allowed, what she ignored, and what she deserves moving forward. And in doing so, she reclaims power she didn't even know she had. What looked like her losing her mind was really her shedding everything that no longer served her. It was her inner world rejecting the false peace she had accepted for too long. It was the fire that burned away dependency, illusions, and silence. In this fragile, painful space, she begins to remember who she is, not the version of her shaped by someone else's disregard, but the version built on self, trust, awareness, and inner fire. And so, what looked like the unraveling of a woman was never her destruction. It was her rebirth. When you act like she doesn't matter, you don't break her. You awaken her. You call forth the strength she forgot she had. You force her to meet the version of herself who no longer tolerates emotional poverty. What once hurt her now teaches her. What once silenced her now speaks through her with undeniable power. She rises, not for revenge, not to prove a point, but because she finally sees herself, values herself, and refuses to settle for anything less. The moment you dismissed her was the moment she discovered that the love she was begging for, she could give to herself, and when that kind of love takes root within her, nothing, and no one, can ever break her the same way again.